ruin, prophecy, silence. A city burning, an abandoned temple, a pot that boils, a mute prophet, warning or condemnation. What destroys a people? The enemy's sword or their own reflection? Today we won't read religion. Today we'll decipher a code, a map of human cracks. Ezekiel saw the fall of Jerusalem. But what did he really see? Political corruption, moral collapse, written destiny, or collective choice? Ask yourself, who abandons whom? God his people, or the people their principles? It's not just history, it's warning, it's a mirror. Today we're going to look inside the boiling pot. Today we'll ask ourselves, is Jerusalem falling again? Jerusalem, the chosen city, the symbol of the covenant, a place believed to be untouchable simply because it was sacred. But what does it really mean to be chosen if you betray your own creed? It was the 6th century before our era. Year 597 BC Babylon dominated the Near East with an iron hand. Nebuchadnezzar II, its king, was the architect of calculated terror. Judah was under siege. King Jehoiakim surrendered. He was taken away along with his court, his soldiers, his craftsmen. Everything useful to Babylon was taken as human loot. As the text says, he carried away all Jerusalem, all the princes and all the mighty men of valor. 2 Kings 24:14. But Jerusalem did not fall completely. A vassal king remained, Zedekiah, an oath of loyalty sealed in the name of his God. But behind the words conspiracy, secret alliances with Egypt, promises of rebellion, betrayal. The temple remained standing. The smoke of sacrifices rose. The priests declared, God is with us. As if gilded walls were an amulet against moral ruin. They believed their divine election was insurance, a contract with no fine print. But beneath the sacred incense, justice rotted. Priests blessing corruption, judges bought, prophets for hire, peace proclaimed while the people bled. Jeremiah, witness of the same time, denounced, how can you say we are wise, and the law of Yahweh is with us? But behold, the lying pen of the scribes has made it into a lie. Jeremiah 8:8. Meanwhile, thousands were already in exile, uprooted, humiliated, forced to rebuild their lives in enemy land. Among them, a young priest named Ezekiel, deported to the banks of the Shebar River in Babylon. There, in the dust of exile, his visions began. They were not words of comfort. They were not easy promises. They were warnings. Autopsies of his nation's soul. Maps of its corruption. The great mystery isn't why Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. It's why Jerusalem handed its destiny to the enemy. Why it refused to change when there was still time. Why it preferred to hear comforting lies instead of uncomfortable truths. This is how our crime scene is set. Not just a physical place, but a collective mental state. A city that abandoned its promise, that confused faith with privilege, and forgot that no temple, no matter how sacred, can contain corruption without collapsing. This is the starting point, the origin of judgment, the beginning of ruin. Today we won't read this as dead history. We'll read it as a code, a warning, a question. Where are we in this same story? The prophet as detective of the soul. Ezekiel was not just a messenger of disaster. He wasn't a prophet shouting out of mere rage. He was something much more unsettling, a forensic examiner of his nation's spirit, an investigator of collective moral crime, a man torn from his home and forced to see the ruins before they happened. While many prophets offered sweet words, Ezekiel dissected the truth. He didn't just announce destruction, he explained it. He justified it as an inevitable consequence. He didn't just say Babylon will come. He went deeper. It will come because you have already given yourselves to it in your hearts. Because every act of corruption, every broken alliance, every pious lie was a brick in the wall of their destiny. But Ezekiel didn't speak plainly like a politician or a judge. He used symbols, riddles, murky, almost dreamlike visions. To confuse, number, to reveal deeper layers. Because some truths are too big to say outright, too terrible to accept without resistance. He saw his people as a sick body refusing diagnosis, a patient who preferred delirium to surgery, and his task was not to heal with pretty words. It was to show the infection, to make it impossible to ignore. That's why his visions were violent, heart-wrenching, sometimes incomprehensible, because his nation's soul was equally fragmented. Ezekiel wasn't the poet of easy hope. He was the chronicler of the fall, the uncomfortable witness, the man who dared to look into the abyss and describe it in detail, not to revel in horror, but so that, perhaps, someone else would find the courage to change. And here is the big question for us. What does the prophet see in our cities today? What truths are we avoiding hearing? Who will dare to be the forensic examiner of our own time? We've seen the crime scene, the historical context, broken alliances, normalized corruption, blind trust in a sacred amulet. But to truly understand the fall, it's not enough to list the facts. We have to decipher the symbols, read the language in which their destiny was written. Because Ezekiel didn't just speak with words, he spoke with images hiding deep meanings, riddles designed to reveal, not to conceal. Now we're going to open that code, to explore each vision, to unravel its message, and to ask what it says to us today, here and now. Analysis of the symbols, the code, the God who abandons the temple. They say there was no image more terrifying for ancient Israel than the divine presence departing. And that's exactly what Ezekiel sees. God rising from his throne, abandoning the Holy of Holies. Sacred silence turned into absolute emptiness. Literally, it's Yahweh leaving. But symbolically, it's something deeper. It's meaning itself withdrawing. It's proof that the sacred is no longer in empty rituals or gilded walls. It's a terrible message. You can't invoke me to bless what has rotted. And it's not just ancient history. It's the story of all human institutions emptied of purpose. Temples, governments, constitutions, promises. Words like justice, freedom, dignity, spoken without faith, without consequence. What happens today when we hollow out our most sacred words? Who really leaves? The God who withdraws, or us who expel him with our lies? The boiling pot. Another vision, a pot at full boil, liquid rising, bubbling, threatening to overflow. For Ezekiel, it was the Babylonian invasion, the unstoppable enemy, inevitable violence. But the symbol goes beyond the army. It speaks of something internal, of accumulated social hatred, of unresolved grudges, of broken alliances and betrayals fermenting like poison. The pot doesn't just announce destruction, it describes the process. Because disaster never arrives all at once. It cooks slowly, with shared lies, accepted violence, normalized fear. And today, what boils under the lid of our democracies? Polarization, latent violence, institutional distrust, hate on social media turned into social gunpowder? Maybe the vision doesn't predict the past, it describes our present. The silenced prophet Ezekiel was ordered to be mute, to stay silent until God himself gave him words, a prophet unable to warn, a messenger silenced by divine command. Literally, it's the punishment of a people who wouldn't listen. Why speak if no one wants to hear? Why shout in a deaf city? Symbolically, it's the terror of silence, the moment when society stops questioning, when power finds no opposition, when truth becomes too uncomfortable to say. Today, we silence prophets too, sometimes with censorship, sometimes with mockery, sometimes with indifference. We create echo chambers to hear nothing that unsettles us. Whom are we silencing today? What truths are we avoiding? When did we decide it was no longer worth speaking? The cut and burned hair, Ezekiel cuts his hair, divides it into 3 parts, burns it, scatters it to the wind, keeps only a tiny remnant. It's a devastating image. Fragmentation, uprooting, near total destruction. Literally, it's the people's fate. Those who die by the sword. Those who die by fire. Those dispersed in exile. Only a remnant will be saved, but the symbol goes deeper. It speaks of broken identity, of burned memory, of communities disintegrated. Today we see it in forced migrations, in crises of meaning, in atomized societies where no one trusts anyone, where we no longer know what unites us. Who are we really when the fire goes out? What remains when everything is scattered? Will we be capable of rebuilding something from what's left? These symbols aren't riddles for scholars. They are codes for the human heart. Warnings that stay alive because they describe universal processes. Because judgment doesn't only come with armies. It comes with silence, with the pot boiling out of control, with the abandonment of meaning, with the fragmentation of what makes us a people. Today, just like then, the question remains open. Will we be able to read these symbols before it's too late? Universal pattern. The cycle of civilization. We've opened the symbols. We've seen the abandoned temple, the boiling pot, the silenced prophet, the fragmented people. But these aren't just visions of one moment in history. They are patterns, universal codes, lessons that repeat. Because the story of Jerusalem is not unique. It's not just the tragedy of one people. It's the mirror of all civilizations. A disturbing idea emerges that every empire, every nation, every culture lives this cycle. Rise, corruption, fall. Rome also believed itself eternal. Its senators bought votes. Its armies plundered in the name of civilization. Its gods were invoked while consciences were sold. And in the end, its walls didn't stop the price of its decay. Modern empires are not exempt. Promises of freedom transformed into control. Justice used as a tool of power. Progress that ignores the cracks opening beneath its feet. Because judgment is not always fire from the sky. Sometimes it's the weight of contradictions collapsing on themselves. Are we destined to repeat this cycle? To live confident in our glory while ignoring the pot boiling beneath us? To silence prophets, empty temples, fragment ourselves into oblivion? Or perhaps there's an even more unsettling question. Is there a way to break the cycle? To hear the warnings in time? To look in the mirror before it's too late? The story of Jerusalem thus becomes a warning. Not to fear an arbitrary divine punishment, but to fear the relentless logic of moral corruption, the price no wall can keep out. This is the true mystery Ezekiel gives us. Not a sealed fate, but a pattern we can choose to repeat or break. Psychological dimension. Judgment as consequence. It's not an arbitrary punishment. It's not the whim of an angry God hurling lightning from the sky. It's something much more unsettling, more human, more inevitable. Ezekiel doesn't invoke a God thirsty for revenge. What he does is present the accumulated bill, the deferred price of every betrayal of one's own ideals, the natural result of thousands of small, crooked decisions. Because judgment doesn't arrive suddenly. It's built brick by brick, with silences bought, with truths buried, with laws twisted to protect some and crush others. It's violence legitimized, it's institutionalized corruption, it's faith turned into empty ritual. It's the collective choosing the comfort of lies over the discomfort of truth. Exile, ruin, the burning of the temple are not magical punishments. They are the moment when the structure can no longer bear the weight of its own contradictions. The point at which the system collapses under the excess of its own injustice. Ezekiel knew it. That's why his message was uncomfortable. Because it removed the easy excuse of the innocent victim punished by a cruel God, and forced people to look in the mirror. We did this. This is the fruit of our choices. Today, we also look for external culprits. Today, we also disguise collective responsibility as cruel chance. But the truth persists. Judgment is not imposed from outside. It's the consequence we choose to ignore until it's too late. And so, the final question stings like an uncomfortable thorn. What bill are we accumulating today? What price are we postponing paying? Existential connection, the mystery today. We're no longer talking just about Jerusalem or Babylon or some distant past covered in dust and ruins. We're talking about us, about now, about here. Because these symbols are eternal, precisely because they describe us. They reveal us. They expose us. So, stop for a moment. Forget ancient history. Forget the exotic names. And ask yourself, what temple have you abandoned? What values did you claim to protect, but emptied of meaning? In what sacred spaces of your life is nothing alive anymore? What pot boils in silence? What hatred cooks under the lid no one wants to lift? What resentments, what lies, what violences do you accept as normal? What fire waits for just one careless moment to burn everything down? Who are you in this story? The mute prophet, who knows the truth but chooses silence. The corrupt king, who pretends loyalty while conspiring in the shadows. The blind people, who trust empty promises because they're afraid to change. Don't answer quickly, because these questions aren't a test. They're a mirror, one that doesn't forgive the makeup. Ezekiel spoke of his people, but in truth, he spoke of all peoples, of all generations, of all of us. Judgment isn't just history, it's warning, it's possibility, it's choice. And today, as back then, the visions keep burning. Not to condemn us, but to ask us, what destiny are we writing with our choices? Solving the enigma. Jerusalem wasn't destroyed by Babylon alone. The enemy was only the final act, the visible result of an invisible process. It was destroyed because it refused to listen, because it preferred the comfort of lies to the harshness of truth, because it refused to correct its errors while there was still time, because it didn't want to heal the open wounds of its own injustice. Judgment wasn't an arbitrary divine act. It was the unwritten law of history. That law which always demands the price of corruption, violence, and indifference. And that law didn't die with the fire of the temple. It's still alive. It acts in every society, in every generation, in each one of us. If we want to avoid that fate, empty prayers and solemn promises aren't enough. We must dare to see ourselves without lies, to see what rots before it collapses, to speak what's uncomfortable before it's too late. Because judgment doesn't begin with armies at the border. It begins with what we tolerate in silence. If this journey made you think, subscribe to keep exploring these mysteries. Share this video to open the debate. Leave us your interpretation in the comments. Tell us, what do you see in these symbols? What are we building or destroying? Because in the end, judgment isn't locked in an ancient book. It's being written today by all of us.